everyone. Welcome back. I am so excited for today's guest, Jahan Khamsehzadeh.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Jahan, you say your last name.
Khamsehzadeh.
Khamsehzadeh. I should have practiced this like 100 times before the interview. Jahan Khamsehzadeh, Ph.D., completed his dissertation on psychedelics in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS, in San Francisco. His book, The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness, and the Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach, is being published by North Atlantic Books and distributed in spring 2022 by Penguin Random House. He earned his master's in consciousness and transformative studies from John F. Kennedy University and his bachelor's from the University of Arizona with a major in philosophy and minors in physics, psychology, and mathematics. Aside from academic work, he has undergone several major trainings, including graduating from the Hakomi Somatic Psychotherapy Program and training within the Mazatec mushroom tradition. He assisted the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy certificate training at CIIS for 2 years and mentored at the newly emerging School of Consciousness Medicine. He works as a facilitator for legal psilocybin mushroom ceremonies in Jamaica with Atman retreats, one of the few opportunities offered worldwide where people can legally experience psilocybin. Jahan is on the Psilo Health Integration team. He also leads a monthly group called Developing a Relationship with Sacred Medicines with the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. And we will have the link to his new book right here in the show notes. Please check it out. So Jahan, let's get into it. And thank you for being patient with my post-COVID brain that is not fully functioning. But the first question I always love to ask my guests is, what was your journey into this path that you're on now? You've studied a lot. You've been fully immersed in all this consciousness, philosophy, psychology. I'm curious, did you go straight from college into this, or were you on a different path for a little while?
There's this underlying current and pull towards purpose and towards this direction the entire time. But it wasn't like a plug and play profession. It wasn't like I could have gone and majored in psychedelics. I had to find other ways around it. I had this major mushroom trip at 18 on the way to see two of my favorite band play that catalyzed a state of oneness. I was atheist, depressed at the time, and all of a sudden had this immersion into experience of divinity and talking to God, which I thought was impossible, and feeling eternal, realizing we're all love and light and that this is heaven. And so in the period of over 3 hours, my life transformed dramatically. Complete different paradigm shift, and life became full of synchronicities, hope, connection to a spiritual reality that I didn't even know existed. And spirituality became almost the focus of my life since then. So this is about 20 years ago. And this happened about 2 months before I started college. And so I knew I wanted to study consciousness and get closer to the root of what I had experienced. And I came in as a neuroscience major because I thought it was one way to come into this intersection of consciousness and matter. Did that for a semester, and then had a course from a physics teacher. And he said, if you want to understand the universe, you have to know physics. So I ended up switching over and focusing on physics and mathematics for 3 years. That time in, I had another mushroom trip, and it said to leave physics and to study mysticism. And I was like, that's not even a profession. That's not a major. There's no route to do this. And I was like, nobody's going to pay you for this. And there's no financial social security in that. But at least there wasn't physics. So there was a very hard move for me to leave what I had been focusing on 8 hours a day for 3 years. But I did it. And I was very happy. He said your soul wouldn't have been happy sitting there studying physics. That's not what you're wanting to know. So I ended up minoring in physics and mathematics and the class away from psychology, which I was just taking because I loved. And philosophy at the time seemed the closest I can get, the big picture thinking. And then eventually came to the Bay Area to focus directly on consciousness. So I left from Tucson, Arizona, and came to John F. Kennedy University and got to focus just on consciousness, and eventually got the doctorate in philosophy, cosmology, consciousness, which was encapsulating almost everything that I'd been looking at. So even when I'm looking at spirituality or consciousness, it's been from this evolutionary lens. From the Big Bang till now, there seems to be a development. And during that time, I was very clear that psychedelics had the biggest impact on my life. more than therapy, more than community work, more than meditation, more than reading, more than everything else. It's really these state experiences that informed me the most. And so I was going into my dissertation focusing on the evolution of consciousness. I came in very clear that I felt could be the biggest leap for humanity. And at 19, I read Terence McKenna's book, Food of the Gods, where he proposed this theory that it was our relationship with psilocybin mushrooms that initially catalyzed our pull into humanity and a larger consciousness. And I had been aware that that was the best theory I had come across this entire time of how humanity evolved. Having gone through all academia for 20 years, looking at anthropology and biology, psychology, all the things that have happened, I had come across no better reason of why humanity evolved. And for me, this was a big deal, that there's this big missing piece to like our story of how we got here, why we're here, how to move forward. And as Terence Dennis McKenna proposed, it was likely a psychedelic compound in the environment that has expanded consciousness. And it happened to be that the most common psychedelic found in the Africa savannas where evolved is the psilocybin mushroom. And as Paul Stamets notes, the most common mushroom in the area is of a psilocybin variety. So the pieces begin to fit very, very well and explained our development in terms of language, in terms of imagination, in terms of social cohesion and empathy and creativity. And it gives a really rooted explanation, like there are chemicals found in the environment that entered our system through our diets, and we find anthropological evidence in the area of cave paintings going back 9,000-10,000 years of mushroom use. The oldest religious texts, like the Rig Vedas, talk about soma, religious plants, a substance that increases consciousness. And the other factor is like there's over 200 different species of psilocybin mushrooms found worldwide. You see them all across North, Central, South America once people come here. So it's been a part of almost every culture's history, is the sense of that there's shamanic religious background, right? So it was the plants in the environment that actually catalyzed this kind of experience as far as back we go. So for me, this was such a big deal and almost like one of the best ideas I've ever come across. So it seemed worth focusing my dissertation on that. So I dove in for a few years, try to create all the rational evidence, but then also pulling in as much as the academics as possible. Initially, there was over 800 footnotes, and now it's pulled down to 700. There's been a lot of editing to kind of really put forward this theory, kind of revise what Terence McKenna had done. But he died 20 years ago, and we have a lot of work since then, especially with the neuroscience, that now we know that psilocybin catalyzes neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. The brain actually physically begins to evolve and grow. It creates a hyper-connected brain state, no biotoxicity, perfectly fits in the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor, better than serotonin, showing that it's been a part of our evolutionary process. So for me, all the pieces fit, and I felt it was also one of the best ways to support the psychedelic movement that leads to so much healing and growth, but really grounds it into our history, and deeply into the science. Ultimately, it's a part of who we are. So that's in the snapshot kind of what pulled me in that direction. And as much as I did into the academics, I also wanted to live it, so I went and got trained in many different modalities, and it's been wondrous to see people, like holding space legally, psilocybin ceremonies in Jamaica. Half the time people's lives change overnight, which is a pretty high marker. I don't know anything else that does that.
Beautiful, beautiful share. I love it. And yeah, this is what has inspired me to even make this whole podcast and speak about this interconnection of this journey of working with these beautiful plants and these supportive medicines to wake up something in us that feels like that purpose, right? Like your divine calling. Like there's something in here, whether it is a psychedelic business or not, it doesn't matter, but really to find that meaning in life and that purpose on your path. Like, where do I want to go? And, I know, especially where we're at right now in the world in 2022, there's so many people going through, depression, anxiety, uncertainty, and really struggling with like, what is this all about? What is happening on the planet? Why am I here now? And I do believe that these medicines are growing in popularity to help us, bring this together, to find that place of path of purpose, that heart, that understanding of maybe some truths that we didn't know about. Even what you said about the 5-HTP receptors, when I first heard that, I was like, oh my God, that's like it's so incredible. I studied psychology and some neuroscience as well in college. And, it's just so interesting that it's like we're made for this, even the person I work with in Peru, my shaman has said every animal on this planet has been known to evolve their consciousness. Like it's part of evolution, including expanding consciousness and getting into other expanded states or non-ordinary states. So, Jahan, let's hear a little bit about your new book and what it's all about. I know you just mentioned a little bit, but it's all about, I know it's called the Psilocybin Connection. So I'm assuming most of the book is about psilocybin, but what inspired you to even want to write this book? Like did this come through a journey as well?
Definitely felt like a soul movement and calling. Something that I had to do. Since I was 15, I felt I wanted to write a book very strongly. And towards my late 20s, it was this deep, almost painful need of like, I need to write this before I die. It's so encompassing. And I had started to write a book twice before, but school took almost all my energy. Like just grad school took an immense amount of focus, a lot of reading and a lot of writing. So it was hard to even have the energy on top of all the schoolwork, which was almost a full-time job. So once I got to the dissertation phase, I was like, finally, like I have the container to just focus on this for a few years, even though it had been building inside for so long. And by that time, there was such an immense wealth to pull from. Like every book I'd read, everything I'd ever thought was just really at my fingertips. It felt, as I mentioned, it's like something I was born to do that almost was like needed for me to feel that sense of peace and release. And so my life's gotten a lot more peaceful once I've written it. It's like I can let it go and it's just kind of father it into the world. So that's where it came from. And the other parts still linked to a sense of purpose was what's the most impactful and effective thing I could do while I was alive? We each have our own unique gifts to give, and mind, I felt part of it had to do with in terms of ideas and perception, to give a new model or paradigm or framework or understanding that kind of allows us to move forward. I think largely the crisis we're facing is of perception, specifically not seeing our sense of interconnection, right? Like everything we do affects everything else. We are a part of everything. And I think one of the medicines that psilocybin gives in all the psychedelics is that experience. So Richard Doyle wrote this great book called Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Drugs, and Evolution of the Noosphere. And he was a professor of English, and he read thousands of trip reports, and he deduced that the main psychedelic insight is that the participant realizes they're part of a vast interconnected system, and that they should be termed ecodelics. So these experiences actually gives us the sense of ecological oneness. And, talking about interconnection, how you had said before, to even get to the ground of what mushrooms are, we'd have to see, Paul Stamets has done great works of mycelium itself. The larger body of the mushroom interconnects the entire landscape together and all the root systems in the environment. And out of this large living vast network, these perfect cap and stem formations arose, again, with psilocybin fits into 5-HT2A receptors so well. And they give us this experience of oneness with the environment, that we're deeply a part of it the entire time. I think that helps heal our depression, which is a sense of isolation and not enoughness, into the sense of we are part of everything. But also inside ignites a sense of purpose, because I am a part of everything. It's not separate, right? Like I need to do something. The way I get to show love in this world and really be myself is by participating and really giving to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful. And I'm so glad you're talking about this because, this is something that's come up in so many interviews about where's the world going? What's happening right now on the planet? How do we save humanity? I just interviewed Charles Eisenstein last month, and, there's that deep longing in so many of us that are like, how can I help facilitate change? Because we do see this greater need for something to happen, to emerge. And, this path of working with these medicines, and this is, I'm sure you maybe share a similar belief that they're growing in popularity so much, like exponentially fast over time, because they're needed at this time. It's like we're facing a lot of crises around the world, and the more you tune in and tap in and realize like, okay, it's not just about the individual me, and it is all this symbiotic system, and we all work together, and there is no disconnection. And it's true. It's like this is the deeper healing that's needed to really help these crises. Like even,
Mm,
even when you just now mentioned depression, this has come up so much about like, I need
yeah.
psilocybin because I heard it cures my depression. It's like, okay, yes, there's that. And then, what might happen is like,
Mm,
well, what's at the root of
mm-hmm,
that depression in the first place? Like, what's beneath that? What is misaligned in your life, or your way of being, or your connection to spirit, or the earth, or one another? So I'm curious, let's talk about
mm-hmm,
whether this is mentioned in your book or not. I'm curious to know, um, what are your insights or your beliefs in
mm-hmm,
why psilocybin has grown
mm-hmm,
in such popularity? I mean, we know it's been around for
mm-hmm.
what, maybe thousands, millennia, but at least in the last, what, 40,
Yeah.
50 years, it's grown exponentially. And of course,
Mm-hmm,
there's some stories as to like why, we're more interconnected in the world than ever before. But what do you think on like a spiritual,
mm-hmm,
mystical level? Like why is this here now, and why is it becoming decriminalized?
mm-hmm.
Why is this,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. There's
time for
definitely
books to be
so many
written on it?
ways to approach the response of what you're sharing. Looking at it very systemically, even outside of culture, but the planet, I believe psychedelics grow in almost all ecosystems, really, to create a state of equilibrium. So the same way you have compounds in your body that help regulate it, so it creates a state of homeostasis and balance. Psychedelics grow everywhere. As Richard Doyle pointed out, because it creates a sense of interconnection and oneness, which really helps regulate the environment. So nature's always growing these compounds to create a sense of balance. I think DMT is found in over 2,000 plants, and there's so many varieties of psychedelic compounds growing everywhere that have quite an effect and a consciousness expanding effect on our system that helps us become more aware. And so, why now? It seems we're really out of balance, in so many ways, destroying the environment, animal factory farming, war, um, and more than ever, I think the system's trying to regulate itself. And I know of no more faster and effective way. And the truth is, they've always been there. So as far as I can get, how old is psilocybin? Merlin Sheldrake recently wrote a book on mushrooms, and he says, and he's a ethnobotanist, he says it's about 65 million years old. That's the furthest we've gone back. So it's been a part of our ecosystem forever. And to make a note about, you talk about other animals, also alter their consciousness. Ronald K. Siegel wrote this book called Intoxication. He was a professor at UCLA for about 20 years. And he found out that about 93% of animals, all species, alter their consciousness chemically. Right. So it's so vast that he calls it the fourth drive of evolution. Given after sex, water, and the need for sleep, if a chemical's present in the environment and the base needs are met by an animal, it will choose to alter its consciousness. So it's a part of our evolutionary system. It's been there in the background for us the entire time. We've been blind to it because we've been so disconnected from nature and the way other animals navigate. We're just domesticated animals. So it's a part of the way nature has always moved forward. We're just waking up to that now, and we they're part of the Americas forever. So there's some writing from the conquistadors in the 1500s. They came and saw psilocybin used in the Americas, and the church's response was, let's eradicate and kill them and repress this, right? And so they wrote all this down. So we have a lot of clergies saying, let's stop this. And so we in the Western culture had been really closed off because we had this viewpoint that we know more, we're more advanced, they're satanic, demonic. We'll just, without even listening to them, crush it. And that's how we've kind of responded to a lot of cultures that we thought were less advanced. Why even listen? And so it was only since 1955, Gordon Wasson went to Mexico, met with Maria Sabina, had the mushrooms, published it in 1957 in Life magazine, that we even have awareness of them. So even though they've been there, we were blind and not looking almost purposely. So, and even once we got awareness, it seems to shock culture at such a deep level that by 1966, 1967, there was movement away to make it illegal. And I think an entire generation had to wait and really fight. MAPS have been doing 30 years of work trying to move this forward with MDMA. We finally started doing research again in the 2000s for psilocybin. The research is just so astounding. We have another generation, more like the hippie generation, to look back on. So like, there are a lot of those people are now in power. So there's a lot of movement. As Michael Pollan points out, we don't really find too much opposition in the psychedelic movement towards making this happen. All the Republicans are on board, the medical establishment is on board. Everybody wants this to happen. They just want it done safely and correctly, right? So the whole planet is winning. It's just been a slow process, so we need to make it more accessible. Um, but as so the medicine helps us realize there's no enemies. We're all in this together, and we're all trying to heal and love ourselves and each other. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that you say like the whole planet's winning and everybody's for this, but it has been this process to, even currently we're speaking
Yeah.
and it's only been decriminalized in a couple places, and then even the state that it's been legalized in, I can't even follow what's going on there because it's not
Right.
fully like a free for all yet. And you said
Yeah.
this keyword safety, and it's interesting because of course I know, I'm like, okay, yes, obviously harm reduction is a big thing, but also psilocybin is one of the safest substances to me, in my humble opinion,
Yeah.
safer than ketamine and MDMA that are becoming, that are legal or becoming legal. And I'm curious, because I've always had the very hands off approach on like, okay, I believe in freedom to alter your consciousness. And if that means you want to try starting with a 10-gram dose, it's probably not advised. But if that's what you really want to
Yeah.
do, like who's to stop you? And we all know there's
Mm-hmm.
many stories of people doing that. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this whole movement when it comes to the psilocybin therapy or the psilocybin decriminalization and legalization that started in one state, but so many
Mm-hmm.
people believe in it. I have clients that are this one's one area, and I know when I interviewed Paul Stamets, he spoke about this. But I have clients that have studied death work, like death doula, death training, the rituals of death, dying with grace, and they all dream of being able to have these centers or at least experiences where you can die with psilocybin and like use it, but then it's not
Mm-hmm.
allowed except maybe Oregon. But yeah, what are your views on where this is going when it comes to this legalization, decriminalization, and is it, like, is it going to become controlled by a few companies? Like, like let's say, like
Mm-hmm.
nicotine is, or whatever. I would call it tobacco, but it's not actually tobacco they're selling. But yeah, what are your views on that direction of
Mm-hmm.
this whole like
I
decriminalization,
think the movements
legalization?
and the substances themselves are already too big for anybody to control. And so I understand the natural fear of the pharmaceutical companies and so on coming in. Um, my personal viewpoint is ethically, we shouldn't be telling anybody what to do as long as it's not hurting somebody else, right? So the ability to alter my own consciousness should be completely my right. And largely the sense of oppression that mostly comes from ignorance, right? Like people are scared and fear is going to overpower everything. It's at the base level of, like, say, Maslow's hierarchy is just survival and security and safety. And so that part of us will hijack the entire system personally and collectively. So we definitely first need to address safety before anything moves forward, because that's where the concerns come from, right? And so that's why it was made illegal in many ways. There was political reasons, but the public jumped on board because it was framed as if these are potentially very hurtful for the younger generation. Now, again, we have solid scientific evidence now showing it's very positive. Countless accounts. So it's no longer a discussion like, are they even helpful? And they were framed in the beginning of they're addictive, and now we know they help solve addiction, right? So as more awareness comes in, there's a lot of more solid ground to start from. And so much of this comes down to the way we've held, just say, substances. Like there's such a moral and ethical dilemma for a lot of people. We have come from this autonomous culture that you should be able to get alignment or get help on your own without the dependence on substance. But we depend on plants for food, for our bodies, for our oxygen. I mean, they create a lot of our air. Well, how about for also our spirituality and our development? I mean, they've made so much of the rest of us. So it's definitely kind of easing in that we're part of these ecological beings that are always taking in chemicals of the environment. Um, it's been nice seeing what's happened in Portugal first, where they decriminalize all substances, because I think that's a fear for a lot of governmental systems of like, oh, if we make drugs legal, it's going to be chaos. It's like going to be hell on earth. It's going to go wild. It happened to be the inverse, right? Without the judgments and the shaming and the criminalization, people had the ability to get healthier and come out. And all the resources that were put into people in jail, they put it towards community mental health. And Portugal did that because it had the highest rate of addiction in Europe when it comes to heroin use. and I think within the dedicated inverse to having the least rate of addiction, right? I mean, it's just like criminalizing people that are already in pain and suffering. They're addicted, right? So it happened to be once you create freedom, there's also no underground cartels, no underground, criminal organizations possible. It's pretty much the suppression that gives power to all these other people that probably shouldn't be having power. I believe the president of Mexico wants to move to complete legalization of substances. I mean, we have such this, again, moral kind of affect that it's bad that I think is like the main thing that we're fighting against. That we think, oh no, just this, like, dare, just say no, not even think about it. Why? So there's a lot of hurdles to move through. But I think once people are waking up that there's a lot of varieties of drugs and that it could be done safely. And ultimately, again, I think what's needed is education. I think the shift can happen a lot faster than any of us can expect. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a great perspective, and isn't that interesting about the results in Portugal and the kind of, this idea, and I've actually surveyed informally, I have a whole community of people interested in psychedelics and purpose, and it's incredible just the informal surveys of how many of you have quit drinking or doing, other drugs or addictions or even getting off of meds with the use of, let's say plant medicines. And it was just amazing. It was like 95% of, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And they're like, this is the only thing that worked. I tried everything. I tried antidepressants. I tried this and this. Why is it mushrooms or psilocybin or ayahuasca? Like, it's the only thing that seemed to have helped. So, which actually brings me to my next question. So I know you do some work with, these legal retreat centers or this legal retreat center in Jamaica. I'm curious, what is bringing people to this work? Especially I think those retreat centers, at least the ones I know about, they do, like many sessions over a 1 week period but what is like the number one reason why maybe people who are newer, especially that like newer people on this path, like what are they looking for?
I guess the quick answer is just depression, but it's so I'd say 70% of people come for depression, 20% for anxiety, and like 10% out of curiosity. And a lot of people for anxiety and depression seems to go together. So the motivation inside is largely pain. Like, people are hurting, and as you've mentioned, they've tried every other route. For them to go outside the country and into the bounds, into the unknown, is because they've explored the territory already. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that, like, I've been 20 years taking SSRI antidepressants. I've been in therapy my entire life, and it hasn't worked. And here's an entire new possibility. And as the studies show, it's effective 80% of the time for treatment-resistant depression, meaning they've already treatment-resistant. They've tried all the other treatments and it hasn't worked. 80% of those people, there's a very small amount of people it's not effective for, but it's a very small amount. It's strange, but I mean, the word pretty much is, it's like it's a miracle, especially, I mean, like, so many people I've seen just suffering for decades, and one journey just shocks their system. Because it kind of shakes us at such a core level of our identity and who we are. So having it didn't come in wanting to focus on this, but because most people come in with depression, I've got to really settle in of what is depression, how is this effective, and so on. And what I've come to is depression is the response of having a ill or ill-informed identity. People feel really badly about themselves. They come to see themselves as not enough and full of shame and not good. And so when you tell yourself, I'm not enough and not good, it's like beating your system down, and you feel depressed. And ultimately, you just don't want to exist anymore. You're like, I want to die. Like, I feel so shitty about myself. I'm constantly in pain. As opposed to somebody that has a lot of confidence and feels good about themselves, life is very pleasurable. So many times depression just comes down to, I don't like myself. That's what it is. And so this heals that at a core level, because it dissolves the identity of who you think you are. You realize that you're love at the core of it, and you're part of this huge network, this huge thing of life. And so it shifts that overnight. Like, I'm not who I think I am. Actually, underneath it, this is this wellspring of creativity and love that I had no way of reaching, because nobody around me even knew. Nobody told me. If you had the right kind of formative parenting or group work that showed you love and security and that you're amazing every day, like, you probably wouldn't be depressed. We just got these information and impressions about who we were normally at a very young age, and society tells us that we're just not enough, and so we're kept in this prison of pain. And so once that shift happens and people are able to experience fullness and love and have that rooted in their body, I mean, they can move forward very quickly.
Yeah, it's incredible because I'm going back and thinking to my first experiences of, as a teenager, a pretty young age, like 14, started working with psychedelics. But, when I really noticed that big shift was at an older age when I, went into consciously, like, I'm going to take this for a reason and not just for a recreational reason. And it was just incredible to see how I lived a life of, I had a lot of anxiety. I did not really have depression, but just a lot of that, like, trauma informed life, right? Like my whole life was just like one constant trauma. And it was amazing how quickly it just seemed to melt away. But granted, I was always doing a lot of other work. I had a daily meditation practice, therapy, studying, reading a lot, really diving into myself and my personal development. And I'm curious, on these retreats or when you work with people, yes, I've had those experiences where it feels like it wiped something out of me for forever. But then, can it just change something like treatment resistant depression? Or is it have something to do with the integration? Like, is there a chemical in the psilocybin that literally comes in and rewires the chemical in your brain that's making you really depressed?
So if I'm looking at it just like objectively in terms of measurable science, what we know is, as I mentioned, it stimulates the growth of new neurons. So the brain physically grows. I think we didn't know that as humanity before 1990s that wasn't even a possibility, that you could take something in your brain and it keeps growing. It creates a state of neuroplasticity, meaning the neural patterns get to shift and change. It stimulates what's known as spinogenesis, meaning the re-enlivening of dendrites. So dendrites being the parts of the neurons that connect to each other. So depression, what it looks like is the deadening of dendrites. So parts of the brain become isolated and aren't talking. What we see is the dendrites come back to life, so the neurons are reconnecting, and it creates this hyper-connected brain states. I recommend people watching this to just look up the MRIs of what psilocybin looks like versus the placebo. I mean, the whole brain is lit up. And so one way to look at this hyper-connected brain state is the brain's becoming unified, right? And you could say all the parts of ourselves are coming up and feeling whole unified. And so for me, this hyper-connected brain state is the correlation or representation of the unity experiences people are seeing. So for me, at the core of the psychedelic experience across this is this experience of oneness. I think that's what heals everything, our identity, our sense of aloneness and belonging and security is like, oh, we're one, like we're one being. That kind of like shifts the entire system very quickly. And as people are having that, it seems that their brain is turning into a sense of oneness. So that's I think, just to get to your answer of how it seems to heal, and it does seem to have huge physical changes in our biology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you so much for the science behind that. Now I'm curious, you've studied all this Hakomi and all this other mysticism and consciousness studies. What is your take on integrating
Yeah.
this work? Like people, because we all know there's so many people now, even microdosing, people microdosing every day or on the microdose regimen, or people, going to ceremonies or just doing psilocybin on their own. Like, what do you think the difference is with and without integration? And do you believe we need
Yeah.
integration?
It's so customized to each person. I think it's different for individuals and it's different for each individual psychedelic experience. My natural temperament has always been for introversion. So I take a journey and then I can't help it. Just keep thinking about it all the time. I'm still thinking about a lot of my journeys that are 20 years ago. Like there isn't a day that I'm not thinking about my psychedelic experiences, right? Because they're so fulfilling and so enriching, and they're hard to even compare to anything I've experienced externally. It's like comparing it to going to another country, but I just went to another dimension, right? Like it's going to shock my system and be like, wow, like I learned more in the journey more than I have read it in reading and classrooms and so on. So I can't help but munch on that information all the time. That being said, there's some people that are far more extroverted, right? So they just get lost in the external environment day to day. And I think it's good for them to have scheduled integration. So I think as a general prescription, I think it's helpful to at least schedule in the calendar 2 integration sessions for every journey. One maybe a few days after because it might take them time to recollect their thoughts, and then a week after that. And it's great down the line if they can connect again. And so the same way, I think it's helpful to do it with another skilled practitioner. The same way you can only do so much therapy by yourself, it's different to have like a skilled therapist, somebody that's there to talk to you, to be in a relationship with you, to help lead you. It's the same doing integration work. So it's not helpful if it's not being embodied. That's the point. I think with psychedelics is to have a good life.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's transformation and change. So peak experiences are awesome, but the hope is that your life becomes more in harmony with what you've learned, right? So if the experience is almost giving you homework, like, hey, you need to do this in your life, change, become more healthy, exercise more, talk to this person, follow your purpose, and you're having this cool experience that is in alignment with all that, but you're not carrying it out, you've missed the entire point. And likely, what I've seen, it won't even keep being effective. You come back to the medicine, it's like, I told you to do everything, you haven't done it. Why are you here? I gave you your homework, and now you're coming back. So it's pivotal. At the same time, I've seen times where people are integrating their experience while it happens. There's some journeys where like it sinks in at such a deep level that, and the whole system restructures and resolves, that there's less of a need for integration. And then there's other times where for the person it was so chaotic and so different, and their mind's not making sense of it, then they need a lot of processing time. And I've had journeys there I could barely move for days because I had to sit there and process. And I've had journeys where I'm like, oh, everything just snapped into place, and I'm fine. There's nothing to talk about anymore. So we'd have to feel into each moment of what is being needed.
I love this viewpoint. This is quite beautiful because that's true. I used to, I would go to an integration circle, the next morning after a ceremony. I'd be like, oh, do we really have to talk about this? But yeah, but at the same time, I've had experiences that it took me a year to process or 2 years, and then I have these little moments from like a mushroom journey, a tiny little sliver that I've never forgotten. Like that I can bring back, like you said, like it just becomes part of your reality. Like I bring it back to my everyday. Like that's the whole point, in my opinion. This is not just like, oh, let's go have fun or let's take a substance and hope it just changes me miraculously. But then really it's like, what are we doing with this? What's the whole point of humanity expanding consciousness, especially at this time, with the depression, it exists, but then maybe, like I said at the beginning, it's like, well, what's at the root that maybe needs to be changed in your life, or what's causing you to feel anxious, or what's causing the disconnect in your life, and what needs to change, which then, brings you to that state of like the the actual peaceful living, not just depending on the substance, once a month or 5 times a year, but having to bring it back to reality and have this be something you can live all the time. So I'm curious, what is your take? Because this has come up. This has actually come up a lot with some of my clients. A lot of my clients do, integration coaching, or they do, they maybe hold space, but, on smaller levels. I do not help like straight up facilitators, but people who are doing, psychedelic assisted therapies. And there has been talk about psychedelics not being right for everyone. How do you feel about that, especially with your background? Do you feel that sometimes these journeys can actually re-traumatize, or maybe make people worse, or maybe they do too much, or maybe they dive in and didn't process it enough? Like, what are your takes on like who this might not be
Yeah,
for?
I feel it's a more of a controversial answer, and it's one I've heard. This question many times. I was doing a presentation at CIS a few years ago, and I was on the panel, and somebody on the panel said psychedelics aren't for everybody. And then we had somebody stand up that was autistic, and they're like, "Who are you to say that?" Right? Like I'm a part of a population that might not have gotten psychedelics, but it's healed me completely. And like, who are you outside of my population or group to say this isn't correct for me? And I could feel the strength in what they were saying, and definitely got me to sink in a lot more. And so my view is they are for everybody, but just not at any moment, right? Like if you're feeling ungrounded or there's no right container, it could be traumatic and not helpful, right? But there's so many wounds and even personality disorders that I think, because it affects us at a core level to see who we are And who is that not helpful for? Or experience a sense of oneness and belonging, right? Like it is tremendously impactful and I think necessary almost for every being. That being said, it doesn't mean that we have the right container for every being right now. And so, for example, there's certain personality types, say borderline or schizophrenia, where the traumas could be so deep that right now, I'll just say in Ottman retreats in Jamaica, that we don't have the container infrastructure to handle somebody like that. It could put us too much at
Mm.
risk because they could become so outgrounded. And a lot of their wounds are their deep attachment trauma wounds that start so early. That being said, well, what about once it's legalized and that person can have an entire team to help them and a room and a facility they can stay in a week so they can dive into the depth of those traumas and really restructure and heal. But you're going to need specialized facilitators that are going to focus on, say, borderline or schizophrenia. And so even these people are saying no to right now, I hope we're able to say yes one day once we have the appropriate support system for them. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's I love that. I love this answer and this take because I've kind of wondered, I tend to be more of like a freedom for all type person to believe like, okay, if they're here and they're available, like everybody has the right, and then yeah, maybe it means learning with a mistake. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had some pretty negative experiences in my life with substances that have taught me a lot. And and I knew like, hey, well, I could have died, but I didn't. And that's the worst that could happen. But psilocybin's pretty safe,
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's not safe if you take a lot and you're not in a great place and something happens. But no, that was a great perspective. So now I'm curious. This is also something else that comes up a lot. So, I work with a lot of clients who have integrated psychedelics into their practices, like healing coaching, and then a lot of people who are just on this medicine path who are awakening to wanting to step more into their purpose. But, as we've seen out there, there's more and more interest in people becoming facilitators or holding space or sitting one-on-one or microdosing coaching or whatever it is. And then there's some people that would argue like you have to be trained or you can't do that. Or maybe, not everybody can just sit and hold the space. I mean, what are your feelings on this? And do you believe that we're to say like who's okay enough to hold a psilocybin space or not, or who, should you only do it with a qualified professional and then it becomes inaccessible because, not everybody can afford to work with someone for $1,000 a pop or whatever it is. Like, what are your takes on this and also the direction it's going in as this maybe becomes more legal?
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely been sitting with that question for a long time. Maybe it's helpful just again to say a little bit of my background, right? Like I've kind of assisted for 2 years at the psychedelic certificate training at CIS. I went through another extensive training. I mentored for a year School of Conscious Medicine. So I've gone through a lot of training programs. 2 days ago, I had an interview with Synthesis. They put on amazing retreats to come in as an advisor for their training program, to build like a quarter of their curriculum, and we'll see how it comes out. But I've been fantasizing about creating a curriculum around this for a very, very long time. I wanted to be a professor for like 12 years, and life kind of had its own route. Then that's much more fulfilling, right? But like I would love to spend most of my time, or a good deal of it, in education. And I think one of the biggest needs we have right now in the world is for guides and psychedelic psychotherapists. That the need for it is so much larger than the availability. So the biggest bottleneck that
Mm-hmm.
we're going to face is having trained individuals. The medicines themselves are very easy to get. Like whether it's manufacturing like MDMA or ketamine, doesn't cost so much. You can make a lot of it. Psilocybin, everybody can grow, but it's skilled, wise individuals have done a lot of work and then hold the spaces like really where we're going to be lagging. And then it comes a problem of accessibility. Even once we have trained ones, of can people afford them? Like it's heartbreaking. It's really sad that the
Mm-hmm.
populations that might need it the most and have the most trauma may not have access to them because of finances. Right. So I think for MDMA, once it's legalized, it's going to be $12,000 to $15,000 for the MDMA therapy, and that'll include 3 sessions. But you're already making it not accessible. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? There needs to be 2 therapists for one person. There needs a medical doctor on board. You need a lot of insurance. You need to also have a space where people can sleep. There's a lot of, to make it legal, there's a lot of things they had to do, right? And so what can we do to just make it accessible to the most vulnerable among us? And so one of the projects I teamed up on was Silo Health, to create a free 4-hour online training program to be a sitter, with the intention to, I was like, well, what do we do for people in just non-white communities or people of color all across the board that haven't had the economic means? And I was like, there needs to be just a free online training program so that they can begin to heal each other within family members and communities, not have a profession, but like once you have this very meaningful experience, you want to share it with everybody, you know? And so we've recorded already. We're at the second stage of production. Like, it's already done. We got 120 people to give us feedback on it. We're at that stage right now. We should do the last recording maybe in a month or two. So it should be released hopefully by the summer. Um, and so there's this wide range of spectrum of, like, people have at least gone through 4 hours of information online for free. So you can sit with a friend. Also, you could work with somebody with decades of training and background and experience, right? So, like, the whole spectrum will be available. There probably also correlated that spectrum would be a financial mean of, like, hey, this is free. Your cousin could hold space for you versus, like, here's a really skilled psychotherapist that can go really deep and it's more nuanced for people with depth of trauma. You know, so that'd be another thing too of, like, is this a relatively healthy person so somebody can just hold space and do harm reduction? Or is this an intense, you know, sexual trauma that this person needs to heal? And so being with a skilled technician that focuses in the area is the appropriate thing, right? So I think the whole spectrum will be available. Um, it kind of goes back to the last question. It was like, who are we to say this is not right for somebody just because there's not a skilled person available? Because, of course, I think people would generally prefer to have somebody skilled. The problem is going to come down to accessibility. Like, that just won't be accessible for a lot of people. So, I mean, that's the quick response. I hope we can find a way that everybody that wants these medicines has access to it, and we're going to try to make that as safe as possible.
Yeah, accessibility has come up almost in every interview I've done, you know, for years now. Because, yeah, like the legal route, well, it's amazing, you know, it's great. I do believe it's needed. The supply and demand, there's a huge gap. And I know from even what I do, I'm a business coach, and I am amazed how many people reach out to me looking out of desperation for help. Like, I don't know where to turn. I mean, I literally got a text message an hour and a half before this interview from someone I know, like, where can I go send my friend? And, you know, I'm like, he actually probably knows people, you know, but it's that like desperation of, like, no one knows where to go. It's not as, you know, like, yes, like the medicine is available, but then to do the deeper work to heal the trauma or heal the depression and to really dive in. And there is a disconnect. And I agree completely, is that there's going to be more of a disconnect. I didn't even realize the MDMA is going to be that expensive. You know, I thought it'd be a few $1,000s, but not in the 5-figure range. Excuse me. But this is something that has come up a lot of, you know, how do we serve and different communities, you know, like you mentioned, the ones that need it the most. And I do believe in getting a fair amount of training, you know, like on some level, and that there are different ranges, you know, maybe someone can be a coach with small doses, you know, like I've done these micro doses in therapy and it's been incredible, you know, or small doses with a friend. And then maybe it's like, you know, go to an integration circle. There's also this idea of doing it in community, you know, doing it in circles, doing it where it maybe is in like a scale, maybe not 100 people, but, you know, a 30, 20 people circle where you can dive in deep, and maybe it's less expensive than doing a $2,000 session with someone. It's interesting, you know, it's a very weird world, and we'll see what happens. You know, I have a lot of prayers for the direction this is going in, because then there's also people who want to bring it into the death process, who want to bring it into health and wellness or dieting or these other areas of life. You know, I actually have 2 clients who are working on, you know, and again, this is like a whole other controversy, psychedelics for children, you know, like teenagers and children, like people, they're kids that they were also resistant to all the other options. And the only thing that helped was psilocybin. Then what? You know, that's a whole new level of controversy where some people aren't really going to agree with that, you know, like, oh, the brain, you know, but I don't know. I did it at 14. I turned out kind of okay. At least I'd like to think. So, Jahan, let's talk a little bit about, we have about, 10, 15 minutes left. I have a question about where you see this whole psilocybin going in the future. Like, what does the future look like? Is it going to be like we just talked about, like this range of people holding space? Like, do you believe that it's going to be sold in the drugstore one day? Like we can just go to the the local CVS and buy it on the shelf. Like, where do you think this is going to go in the next, let's say, like 10, 20 years, or, in our future with psilocybin in particular?
Yeah. I guess the quick response is that we have no reference points for what's happening right now anytime in our past. Whether we look at, the 60s or, I mean, last time psychedelics were seemed so available, we're looking maybe before the agricultural revolution, where it's just such a part of our culture. We know it's part of the Greek culture with the Eleusinian mysteries. Um, to see something that's so effective, changing consciousness so quickly, heals so much with almost it's so safe. I mean, we have no point of reference. In terms of how available it'll be, like I'm hoping a lot of people will just be growing them themselves and sharing with their community. Um, it doesn't cost much to grow mushrooms. It's like $150, and if you learn to do it right, you have almost a lifetime supply, right? Because you can just keep taking the spore prints and doing it and do it. So it doesn't really cost much. It's just learning skills and then learning to share. That being said, I hope microdoses are available easy everywhere, and hopefully outside the realm of pharmaceutical companies, though I'm sure they're going to get in it. They're easy to make. They don't cost much of anything. So if you're not doing it yourself, hopefully you're getting it from a neighbor. I know Zydor here in Oakland. It's a no, just plant place like church. Like they're like, no, we're going to start just selling microdoses of mushrooms. You just become a church member, and you can just get it from our website. So I know there's places in Oregon. I think they're shipping it out too. So there'll be smaller companies or more like church-like places that you can get them. That being said, I can't imagine the pharmaceutical company not getting into it because it is so effective. So I'm sure they're going to patent whatever they can, and try to sell you the same stuff, or they'll look at psilocybin and change an atom into and be like, well, this is different and market it as better. And so we can charge it upscale, 100x more than what it was, So given this, so much how much SSRIs and medications cost, and these are more effective, it costs almost nothing. They're going to at least try to charge that same amount. Um, Whether it's LSD, ketamine, whatever, in microdose amounts, I'm sure they're gonna get in. So I think it's gonna be available from such a variety of sources. Why not have it at the gas station next to all the other small pills they're selling? Again, these are safer, cost less, more effective. I can see it being everywhere. Even I mean, having a whole bunch of caffeine is more disorienting than having a small amount of psilocybin. So if we're already having coffee everywhere else, it's just like, why not make this available? So I think it'll happen fast. I was in the city council meeting, in when we moved to decriminalize it in Oakland, and there was a sense going in of like, we don't like, could this really pass? Like, we're just doing this, and it was nice to see that it was at first time almost unanimous, then unanimous by the city council, where everybody was just like, no, we want this to happen. We just want it to be done safely. So it quickly went by, and it seemed so many cities across the US were inspired, right? And we thought this might be a decade away, and it happened. It seems with just a few months of work, it cut on. And so that can happen almost everywhere and is happening. As I mentioned, there's not really resistance. It's just people putting in like the grit and educating people and spreading awareness and getting people signed on. I mean, 2023 is the projected legalization for MDMA and psilocybin. Once that happens, I think it's going to be on news publications network everywhere. I'm like, we just legalized mushrooms. It's going to be massive. Given its effectiveness, I can't imagine every town not having at least one psychedelic psychotherapy center, right? It's going to be more effective than regular therapy. So every town in the US will probably have many psychedelic psychotherapy centers. You're going to have retreat centers opening up. You have ceremonies. You're going to have, guides. It's going to be a plethora. There's going to be occupations that don't exist yet, right? I mean, it's going to be massive, which gives me hope in terms of the transformation of our society, where people can show up and heal decades of stuff potentially at one time, have a whole new amount of creativity of things they've never experienced before. So when it comes to changing our society and planet, I see nothing else that can potentially be as effective and work so quickly. So once it's in the system, I mean, it gives me a lot of hope for 2025 and 2030. How quickly our society can potentially change.
Amazing. I love it. I love it. It's so beautiful to think about. I'm like, wow. But it's true. Everything's happening exponentially fast. And I think in a beautiful way. We'll see.
Mhm.
Hopefully it's not the Wild West like everybody talks about. But okay,
Yeah.
so Jahan, tell people a little bit more about, I know you have a book coming out, where to find you. What else do you have coming up, in this year that people can look out for, follow you, sign up for?
Yeah, so the website's www.psychedelicevolution.org. That's psychedelicevolution.org. The book comes out April 5th, The Psilocybin Connection. It's already available for pre-order across all the platforms. So it's Amazon, Google Play, straight from the distributor, which is Penguin Random House. Um, they're working on the audiobook. It should be released the same day. We got a great narrator. So that's been, again, it feels like a lifetime of work. So I'm really happy that's been moving into the world. I'm now focusing on podcasts and other things to get the word out. I just wrote an article for Lucid News that should probably be out next week, focusing on sexual energy, how erotic energy arises in psychedelic psychotherapy and how to hold it. It's been very controversial and I think a much needed discussion. Um, I'll probably spend the rest of this year focusing on the book release, many ways, because that's been what's been most meaningful and important to me and the best way to contribute. I think it fills in a lot of the gaps that most people aren't even aware of within the framework of the movement itself and gives us a deeper grounding in terms of how they fit with it between us and the world. It's meant to enlarge the context, it's just not this cultural thing, but it's a very evolutionary thing. In that sense, like really grounding it into science and like the main narrative of our story of who we are as humans. Um, I'm in this for life, right? Like again, I don't know anything as exciting, as fascinating on every level. There's healing, but then oh my God, it's so enriching and cognitively stimulating. Terence McKenna said these are like novelty generators. They create newness. So they are more fascinating than watching movies. I think they can inspire us greatly. And, we've brought up purpose so much. I think our life without it doesn't have the sense of meaning, but it kind of really seems to inspire and awake us to want to give. And I don't know anything else better to give my sense of purpose over to. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes. Ah, that's so well said. And I do agree. And that's my bigger prayer for humanity, is to be able to, turn to these beautiful plant allies that are here to support us and, find your heart, find your purpose, find that interconnection and bring it back to the world and share your unique medicine, whatever that might be. Jahan,
Yeah.
it was such an honor to have you here. It was really
It's an
such a
honor.
great conversation. I actually learned a lot that I hadn't known. And we'll have the link to your book. And I really encourage everybody to buy this and share this important work. And
Yeah.
here we go. Awesome, awesome.
Thank you so much, Beth. It was great to spend time here with you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.